Hello, welcome to our session for strategy formulation, functional strategy, and strategic choice. So, this is a continuation of our discussion pertaining to um, strategy formulation. Okay, so but this time we will be discussing a more specific function or strategy. Okay, so when you define or when we say functional strategy, this is actually more of an approach. Okay, this is an approach on a certain functional area that takes to achieve corporate and business unit objectives and strategies by maximizing resource productivity. Mostly, it is concerned with developing and nurturing a distinctive competence to provide a company or business unit with a competitive advantage. So, just as a multi-divisional corporation has several business units, each with its own business strategy, each business unit has its own set of departments, each with its own functional strategy. So, if you are going to look back on the different discussions of strategy formulation that we had for the past few days, we started with the company as a whole, and then we tried to discuss strategy formulation on a smaller portion. No? So, the strategy formulation first discussed how will the company create its strategies on a wider perspective, and then narrowing it down now to the more specific functional areas or departments of the organization. So the orientation of a functional strategy is dictated by its parent business unit's strategy. For example, a business unit following a competitive strategy of differentiation through high quality might require also a manufacturing functional strategy that emphasizes expensive quality assurance processes over cheaper high volume production, or a human resource functional strategy that emphasizes the hiring and training of highly skilled but costly workforce, and a marketing functional strategy that emphasizes distribution channel pull using advertising to increase consumer demand over push, which is using promotional allowances to retailers. So if a business unit were to follow a low cost competitive strategy, however, a different set of functional strategies would be needed to support the business strategy. So, from the wider perspective, what we want to do is that there should be a simulation or there should be synchronous activities and plans and strategies on the narrower level, which is more on the functional or the department level. Okay. Now, since we're talking about functional areas or departments, there will be, or the discussion now will focus on the different areas or departments. So let us start with marketing strategy. So a marketing strategy can be either a market development or product development. So what's the difference? Remember that marketing strategy deals with pricing, selling, and distributing a product. Using a market development strategy, a company or business unit can capture a larger share of an existing market for current products through market saturation and market penetration, or develop new uses and or markets for current products. For example, we have consumer product giants such as P&G, Colgate Palmolive, and Unilever. These are actually experts not using advertising and promotion to implement a market saturation or penetration strategy to gain the dominant market share in a product category. Meanwhile, using the product development strategy, company or unit can develop new products for existing markets or develop new products for new markets. So in this case, we can have Church and White or D&W, C&D has had great success by following the first product development strategy, developing new products to sell to its current customers in the existing markets. We also have other numerous marketing strategies for advertising and promotion. For example, A company or business unit can, as I have said earlier, choose between push and pull marketing strategies. Many large food and consumer products companies in the US and Canada follow a push strategy by spending a amount of money on trade promotion in order to gain or hold shelf space in retail outlets. This trade promotion includes discounts, in store special offers, and advertising allowances designed to push products through the distribution system. I think most of you here, if not all, perhaps have heard already of Kellogg's, no? The Kellogg company decided a few years ago to change its emphasis from a push to a pull strategy, in which advertising pulls the products through the distribution channels. The company in this type of strategy spends more money on consumer advertising designed to build brand awareness so that shoppers will ask for the products. So research has found that a high level of advertising, which is a part of a pull strategy, is actually beneficial to leading brands in a market. Strong brands provide a competitive advantage to a firm because they can act as entry barriers and usually generate higher market share. Now, aside from this push strategy and pull strategy, there are also other marketing strategies that deal with distribution and pricing. Should a company use distributors and dealers to sell its products? Should it sell directly to mass merchandisers? Or should it use the direct marketing model by selling straight to the consumers via the internet? So using multiple channels simultaneously can sometimes lead to problems, no? In order to increase sales, for example, of its lawn tractors and mowers, John Deere decided to sell the products not only through its current dealer network, but also through mass merchandisers such as Home Depot. Deere's dealers, however, were furious. They considered Home Depot to be a competitor. So why in the world would John Deere sell its products through Home Depot, which is a big company in comparison to the different merchandisers? So the dealers are dealers. These dealers were concerned that Home Depot's ability to underprice them would eventually lead to their becoming little more than repair facilities for their competition and be left with insufficient sales to stay in business. However, the bulk of John Deere's 32 billion US dollars in revenue comes from equipment sold to farmers. Home Depot, on the other hand, sells the average lawn mower or tractor that was never a big part of the dealer's business. So when pricing a new product, a company or business unit can follow one of two strategies. For new product pioneers, skim pricing offers us the opportunity to skim the cream from the top of the demand curve with a high price while the product is novel and competitors are few. Meanwhile, in contrast, penetration pricing attempts to hasten market development and offers the pioneer the opportunity to use the experience curve to gain market share with a low price and then dominate the industry. So, depending on corporate and business unit objectives and strategies, either of these choices may be desirable to a particular company or unit. Penetration pricing is, however, more likely than skim pricing to raise a unit's operating profit if we are talking about long term. So the use of the internet to market goods directly to consumers allows a company to use dynamic pricing, a practice in which prices vary frequently based upon demand, market segment, and product availability. So all of these should be considered by the marketing department whenever we are going to consider also the different strategies that the marketing department should implement or formulate. Next, we have the financial strategy. The financial strategy examines the financial implications of corporate and business level strategic options and identifies the best financial course of action. It can also provide competitive advantage through a lower cost of funds and a flexible ability to raise capital to support the business strategy. Financial strategy usually attempts to maximize the financial value of a firm. However, The trade-off between achieving the desired debt-to-equity ratio and relying on internal long-term financing via cash flow is a key issue in financial strategy. Many medium and small-sized family-owned companies try to avoid all external sources of funds in order to avoid outside entanglements and, of course, to keep control of the company within the family. On the other hand, most large publicly held firms or companies have long-term debt and keep a large amount of money in cash and short-term investments. One of these examples is Apple Incorporated, which had more than 215 billion US dollars cash hoard by early 2016. Many financial analysts believe, however, that only by financing through long-term debt can a corporation use financial leverage to boost earnings per share, thus raising stock price and the overall value of the company. Research indicates that higher debt levels not only deter takeover by other firms, but also lead to improved productivity and improved cash flows by forcing management to focus on core businesses. High debt can also be a problem. However, when the company falter economy or the company falters and a company's cash flow drops. Another research reveals that a firm's financial strategy is influenced by its corporate diversification strategy. Equity financing, for example, is preferred for related diversification, whereas debt financing is preferred for unrelated diversification. So here, you can see that there should be a connection between your corporate strategy and your financial strategy because these related diversification and unrelated diversification are actually corporate strategies that we have discussed in the previous session. Now, in a leveraged buyout, a company is acquired in a transaction financed largely by debt, usually obtained from a third party such as an insurance company or an investment banker. Ultimately, the debt is paid with money generated from the acquired company's operations or by sales of its assets. The acquired company, in effect, pays for its own acquisition. Management of some companies, for example, these LBOs or the leveraged buyouts is then under tremendous pressure to keep the highly leveraged company profitable. Unfortunately, the huge amount of debt on the acquired company's books may actually cause its eventual decline by focusing management's attention on short-term matters. For example, 1 year after the buyout, the cash flow of eight of the largest LBOs made during 2006 to 2007 was barely enough to cover interest payments. One study of the LBO, also called the management buyouts, if they are led by a company's current management, revealed that the financial performance of the typical LBO usually falls below the industry average in the fourth year after the buyout. So the firm declines because of inflated expectations, utilization of old slack, management burnout, and a lack of strategic management. Often, the only solutions are to sell the company or to again go public by selling stock to finance growth. So thus, the management of dividends and stock price in financial strategy is an important part of a corporation's strategy. Another strategy would be focusing on the research and development department. It deals with products and processes, innovation, and improvement. It also deals with the appropriate mix of different types of R&D, the basic, product, or process, and with a question of how new technology should be accessed through internal development, external acquisition, or strategic alliances. RIM has influenced and floundered by going back and forth among these approaches rather than choosing an approach and investing their resources. RIM is, by the way, a company. So one of the R&D choices is to be either a technological leader, pioneering an innovation, or a technological follower, imitating the products of competitors. One example of A leader R&D is Nike Incorporated. This company has utilized a leader R&D functional strategy to achieve a differentiation competitive advantage. Do you know that Nike spends more than most in the industry on R&D to differentiate the performance of its athletic shoes from that of its competitors? As a result, its products have become the favorite of serious athletes. This happened despite the fact that Nike simultaneously pursues a low-cost manufacturing approach. On the other hand, an example of the use of the follower R&D functional strategy to achieve a low-cost competitive advantage are we have Dean Foods Company, the maker of brands as Dairy Pure, Lando Lakes, and True Moon. So an increasing number of companies are working with their suppliers to help them keep up with changing technology. They are beginning to realize that a firm cannot be competitive technologically only through internal development. A newer approach to R&D is what we call open innovation, in which a firm uses alliances and connections with corporate, government, academic labs, and consumers to develop new products and services. Open innovation has been widely accepted and applied to a wide variety of companies in every industry, including some US state governments and the US National Football League. One example of this is Intel. Intel opened four small scale research facilities adjacent to universities to promote the cross pollination of ideas. Also, 13 US university labs engaging in nanotechnology have formed the National Nanotechnology Infrastructure Network in order to offer their resources to businesses for a fee. Mattel, Walmart, and other toy manufacturers and retailers use idea brokers to scout for new toy ideas. IBM adopted the open operating system for some of its computer products and systems, drawing on a core code base that is continually improved and enhanced by a massive global community of software developers, of whom only a fraction work for IBM. So these are just examples of how open innovation is being widely adopted or applied and accepted in many different parts of the world. Now, a slightly different approach to technology development is for a large firm such as IBM or Microsoft to purchase minority stocks in relatively new high-tech entrepreneurial ventures that need capital to continue operation. Investing corporate venture capital is one way to gain access to promising innovations at a lower cost than by developing them internally. The next strategy focuses on operations. This determines how and where a product or service is to be manufactured, the level of vertical integration in the production process, the deployment of physical resources, and relationships with suppliers. It should also deal with the optimum level of technology the firm should use in its operations processes. Advanced Manufacturing Technology, or AMT, is revolutionizing operations worldwide and should continue to have a major impact as corporations strive to integrate diverse business activities by using the computer assisted design manufacturing principles, or the CAD or CAM. The use of CAD or CAM, flexible manufacturing systems, computer numerically controlled systems, automatically guided vehicles, robotics, manufacturing resource planning, optimized production technology, and just-in-time techniques contribute to increased flexibility, quick response time, and higher productivity. Such investments also act to increase the company's fixed costs and could cause significant problems if the company isn't able to achieve economies of scale or scope. A firm's manufacturing strategy is often affected by a product's popularity. As the sales of a product increases, there will be an increase in production volume, ranging from lot sizes as low as one in a job shop, which is a one-of-a-kind production using skilled labor, through connected line batch flow, which are components of standardized machine functioning systems. but is positioned in the same order as the parts are processed, to lot sizes as high as 100,000 or more per year for flexible manufacturing systems and dedicated transfer lines. So, according to this concept, the product becomes standardized into a commodity over time in conjunction with increasing demand. Thus, flexibility gives way to efficiency. Meanwhile, purchasing strategy deals with obtaining the raw materials, parts, and supplies needed to perform the operations functions. A contentious issue for manufacturing companies throughout the world is the availability of resources needed to operate a modern factory. The dramatic swings in the fundamental elements of business, like for example, we have the oil, electricity, and rare earth materials, among many others, has drastically boosted costs, only some of which can be passed on to the customers in a competitive environment. The likelihood that fresh water will become an equally scarce resource is causing many companies to rethink water intensive manufacturing processes. So the basic purchasing choices are multiple, sole, and parallel sourcing. Under multiple sourcing, the purchasing company orders a particular part from several vendors. Multiple sourcing has traditionally been considered superior to other purchasing approaches because number one, it forces suppliers to compete for the business of an important buyer, thus reducing purchasing costs. Number two, if one supplier cannot deliver, another usually can, thus guaranteeing that parts and supplies are always on hand when needed. Multiple sourcing has been one way for a purchasing firm to control the relationship with its suppliers. So long as suppliers can provide evidence that they can meet the product specifications, they are kept on the purchaser's list of acceptable vendors for specific parts and supplies. Unfortunately, the common practice of accepting the lowest bid often compromises quality. I believe you have already heard of Edwards Deming. Okay, so Deming is a well-known management consultant. He strongly recommended sole sourcing as the only manageable way to obtain higher supplier quality. Sole sourcing relies on only one supplier for a particular part. So given his concern with designing quality into a product in its early stages of development, Deming argued that the buyer should work closely with the supplier at all stages. This reduces both cost and time spent on product design, thus improving quality. It can also simplify the purchasing company's production process by using the just-in-time concept of having the purchased parts arrive at the plant just when they are needed rather than keeping inventories. The concept of sole sourcing is taken one step further in JIT2, in which vendor sales representatives actually have desks next to the purchasing company's factory floor, attend production status meetings, visit the R&D lab, and analyze the purchasing company's sales forecasts. Imagine that. These in-house suppliers then write sales orders for which the purchasing company is billed. So developed by Lance Dixon at Bose Corporation, JIT2 is used as a technique that provides a competitive advantage. Now, sole sourcing reduces transaction costs and builds quality by having the purchaser and supplier work together as partners rather than as adversaries. With sole sourcing, more companies will have longer relationships with fewer suppliers. Research has found that buyer-supplier collaboration and joint problem-solving with both parties dependent upon the other results in the development of competitive capabilities, higher quality, lower costs, and better scheduling. However, sole sourcing does have limitations. If a supplier is unable to deliver a part, the purchaser has no alternative but to delay production. Multiple suppliers can provide a purchaser with better information about new technology and performance capabilities. The limitations of sole sourcing have led to the development of parallel sourcing. In parallel sourcing, two suppliers are the sole suppliers of two different parts, but they are also backup suppliers for each other's parts. If one vendor cannot supply all of its parts on time, the other vendor is asked to make up the difference. So the internet has changed the ability of procurement managers to compare and source supplies for their organization. Research indicates that companies using internet based technologies are able to lower administrative costs and purchase prices. Sometimes, innovations tied to the use of the internet for one strategy are adopted by other areas. Another strategy should focus on logistics. Logistics strategy deals with the flow of products into and out of the manufacturing process. Three trends related to this strategy are evident: centralization, outsourcing, and the use of the internet. To gain logistical synergies across business units, corporations began centralizing logistics in the headquarters group. This centralized logistics group usually contains specialists with expertise in different transportation modes, such as rail or trucking. They work to aggregate shipping volumes across the entire corporation to gain better contracts with shippers. Companies such as Georgia Pacific, Marriott, and Union Carbide view the logistics function as an important way to differentiate themselves from the competition, to add value, and to reduce costs. You might have seen that in the past few years, a diverse set of firms from around the world have moved quickly on the logistics front, pushed by Amazon's ability to provide same day service, a logistical feat in business. Most providers cannot match Amazon's efficiency as a result of a massive investment in logistics, and have still had to create complex systems to match rising customer expectations. Amazon changed the whole game by introducing 1 hour delivery in major American cities and even a series of Wi Fi connected buttons that allow consumers to simply push to reorder select products. And that's what you should consider also in terms of creating your logistics strategy. Another strategy should focus on the human resource management. Among many other things, HRM strategy addresses issues that range from whether a company or business unit should hire a large number of low skilled employees who receive low pay, perform repetitive jobs, and will most likely quit after a short time, for example, the fast food restaurant, to whether they should hire skilled employees who receive relatively high pay and are cross trained to participate in self managing work teams. As work increases in complexity, it becomes more suited for teams, especially in the case of innovative product development efforts. These self managed work teams are the hallmark of the Silicon Valley startup and have been successfully used in a wide range of industries. Research on large multinational established companies indicates that the use of work teams leads to increased quality and productivity, as well as to higher employee satisfaction and commitment. Companies following a competitive strategy of differentiation through high quality use input from subordinates and peers in performance appraisals to a greater extent than do firms following other business strategies. A complete 360-degree appraisal in which performance input is gathered from multiple sources is considered to be a standard expectation of good HR management practices. Companies are finding that having a diverse workforce is a competitive advantage. Also, research reveals that firms with a high degree of diversity following a growth strategy have higher productivity than do firms with less racial diversity. For example, Avon Company was able to turn around its unprofitable inner city markets by putting African American and Hispanic managers in charge of marketing to these markets. Diversity in terms of age and national origin also offers benefits. DuPont's use of multinational teams has helped the company develop and market products internationally. For example, McDonald's found that older workers performed as well as, if not better than, younger employees. Another strategy should focus on information technology, as corporations have always used information technology to provide their business units with competitive advantage. When FedEx first provided its customers with PowerShip computer software, To store addresses, print shipping labels, and track package location, its sales jumped significantly. UPS soon followed with its own MaxiShip software. Viewing its information system as a distinctive competency, FedEx continued to push for further advantage over UPS by using its website to enable customers to track their packages. FedEx used this competency in its advertisements by showing how customers could track the progress of their shipments. Soon thereafter, UPS provided the same service. Although it can be argued that information technology has now become so pervasive that it no longer offers companies a competitive advantage. One company, Gartner Worldwide, reported that in 2015, corporations worldwide spent over 3.5 trillion US dollars annually on information technology, with that number forecasted to approach 4 trillion US dollars by 2019. So multinational companies or corporations use sophisticated intranets to allow employees to practice follow the sun management, in which project team members living in one country can pass their work to team members in another country in which the workday is just beginning. Thus, night shifts are no longer needed. So the development of instant translation software is also enabling workers to have online communication with coworkers in other countries who use a different language. See the innovation? So right here, you can understand how information technology has actually impacted, no, or affected the types of services and the different strategies that companies are doing worldwide. Now, for a functional strategy to have the best chance of success, it should be built on a distinctive competency residing within that functional area. Still remember distinctive competency, which we discussed in the previous weeks? If a corporation does not have a distinctive competency in a particular functional area, that functional area could be a candidate for outsourcing. So what do we mean by outsourcing? It is purchasing a product or service externally that had been previously provided internally. Thus, it is the reverse of vertical integration. Outsourcing is becoming an increasingly important part of the strategic decision-making discussion. There are many pros and cons to outsourcing, with managers increasingly focusing on non-strategically critical parts of the business as categories for outsourcing. However, there are specific examples in which companies have outsourced as a means of increasing efficiency and, in some cases, quality. According to the latest biannual survey by the Deloitte Consulting, 53% of the companies surveyed outsourced some elements of their IT function. Interestingly, 16% outsource their HR function, with 22% of those who don't currently outsource HR planning to do so in the near future. The top factors in a successful outsourcing relationship seem to be a spirit of partnership, a well-designed agreement, joint governance, and consistent communication. Meanwhile, offshoring is the outsourcing of an activity or a function to a wholly owned company or an independent provider in another country. Offshoring is a simple reality of business operations that has been supported by advances in information and communication technologies, the development of stable, secure, and high-speed data transmission systems, and logistical advances like containerized shipping. Do you know that in 2016, 53% of US manufacturing companies outsource with offshore operations? The leading countries are India, Indonesia, China, Bulgaria, and the Philippines. These countries have low-cost qualified labor and an educated workforce. The pay gap can be so dramatic that it overwhelms almost all other considerations. Consider that a Mexican assembly line worker earns an average of 4 US dollars to 5 US dollars an hour plus benefits, compared to 28 US dollars an hour plus benefits for the top paid Detroit worker, and still substantially less than the lowest paid US auto plant worker who earns 15 US dollars to 20 US dollars an hour plus benefits. Software programming and customer service in particular are also being outsourced to India. For example, GE's back office services unit GE Capital International Services, which was spun off into a new company called Genpact, is one of the oldest and biggest of India's outsourcing companies. From only 26 million US dollars in 1999, its annual revenues grew to over 2.5 billion US dollars by 2016. As part of this trend, IBM acquired Dax E-Services Limited, one of India's biggest suppliers of remote business services. So outsourcing, including offshoring, has significant disadvantages as well. For example, mounting complaints forced Dell Computer to stop routing corporate customers to a technical support call center in Bangalore, India. GE's introduction of a new washing machine was delayed 3 weeks because of production problems at a supplier's company to which it had contracted out key work. Some companies have found themselves locked into long-term contracts with outside suppliers that are no longer competitive. Some authorities also propose that the cumulative effects of continued outsourcing steadily reduces a firm's ability to learn new skills and to develop new competencies. So one survey of 129 outsourcing firms revealed that half of the outsourcing projects undertaken in 1 year failed to deliver anticipated savings. This is an agreement with a survey by Bain and Company in which 51% of large North American, European, and Asian firms stated that outsourcing, including offshoring, did not meet their expectations. Another survey of software projects by MIT found that the median Indian project had 10% more software bugs than did comparable US projects. A study of 91 outsourcing efforts conducted by European and North American firms found 7 major errors that should be avoided. Number one, outsourcing activities that should not be outsourced. In this case, companies failed to keep core activities in-house. Selecting the wrong vendors. Vendors who were not trustworthy or lacked state-of-the-art processes. Writing a poor contract. Companies failed to establish a balance of power in the relationship. Overlooking personal issues. Employees lost commitment to the firm. Losing control over the outsourced activity. Qualified managers, in this case, failed to manage the outsourced activity. Overlooking the hidden costs of outsourcing. Okay? So transaction costs overwhelmed other savings. And lastly, failing to plan an exit strategy, wherein companies failed to build reversibility clauses into the contract. So the key to outsourcing is to purchase from outside only those activities that are not key to the company's distinctive competencies. So in your screen, you can see here the proposed outsourcing matrix. So a firm in this case should consider outsourcing any activity or function that has low potential for competitive advantage. If that activity constitutes only a small part of the total value of the firm's product or services, it could be purchased on the open market, assuming that quality providers of the activity are plentiful. If, however, the activity contributes highly to the company's products or services, the firm should purchase it through long-term contracts with trusted suppliers or distributors. A firm should always produce at least some of the activity or function if that activity has the potential for providing the company some competitive advantage. However, full integration should be considered only when that activity or function adds significant value to the company's products or services in addition to providing competitive advantage. Now, several strategies that could be considered corporate, business, or functional are very dangerous. Managers who have made poor analysis or lack creativity may be trapped into considering some of the following strategies that should be avoided. Number one, follow the leader. Imitating a leader's competitor's strategy might seem to be a good idea, but it ignores a firm's particular competitive advantages and the possibility that the leader may be wrong. Hit another home run. If a company is successful because it pioneered an extremely successful product, it tends to search for another super product that will ensure growth and prosperity. As in betting on long shots in horse races, the probability of finding a second winner is slight. Arms race, entering into a spirited battle with another firm for increased market share might increase sales revenue, but that increase will probably more than offset by increases in advertising, promotion, R&D, and manufacturing costs. Do everything. When faced with several interesting opportunities, management might tend to leap at all of them, At first, a corporation might have enough resources to develop each idea into a project, but money, time, and energy are soon exhausted as the many projects demand large infusions of resources. Lastly, losing hand. A corporation might have invested so much in a particular strategy that top management is unwilling to accept its failure. Believing that it has too much invested to quit, management may continue to throw good money after that. So that's losing hand. Now, after the pros and cons of the potential strategic alternatives have been identified and evaluated, one must be selected for implementation. By now, it is likely that many feasible alternatives will have emerged. The question is, how is the best strategy determined? An important consideration in the selection of a strategy is the ability of each alternative to satisfy agreed upon objectives with the least resources and the fewest negative side effects. The competitive advantages developed earlier that we have discussed a few weeks ago using the VRIO framework is an excellent place to start. So it is therefore important to develop a tentative implementation plan in order to address the difficulties that management is likely to face. So this should be done in light of the societal trends, the industry, and the company situation based on the construction of scenarios. So corporate scenarios are pro forma or estimated future balance sheets and income statements that forecast the effect each alternative strategy and its various programs will likely have on division and corporate return on investment. So the recommended scenarios are simply extensions of the industry scenarios. So if, for example, industry scenarios suggest the probable emergence of a strong market demand in a specific country for certain products, a series of alternative strategy scenarios can be developed. So to construct a corporate scenario, we have to follow the following steps. Number one, use industry scenarios to develop a set of assumptions about the task environment. For example, you may consider the what 3M did. No, 3M required the general manager of each business unit to describe annually what his or her industry will look like in 15 years. So you can have a list of optimistic, pessimistic, and most likely assumptions for key economic factors such as the GDP, the prime interest rate, and for other key external strategic factors such as governmental regulation and industry trends. Number two, develop common-sized financial statements for the companies or business units' previous years to serve as the basis for the trend analysis projections or pro forma financial statements. Okay. Number three, construct detailed pro forma financial statements for your strategic alternative. So you can list the actual figures from the year's financial statements. Okay, also you can go through the same processes with the same strategic alternative, but the pessimistic figures can have the 5 years, and also the most likely figures should be considered. Okay, now the attractiveness of a particular strategic alternative is partially a function of the amount of risk it entails. Risk is composed not only of the probability that the strategy will be effective, but also of the amount of assets that the corporation must allocate to that strategy. And also, the length of time the assets will be available for other use. So because of variation among countries in terms of customs, regulations, and resources, companies operating in global industries must deal with a greater amount of risk than firms operating only in one country. Remember, however, that the greater the assets involved and the longer they are committed, the more likely top management is to demand a high probability of success. Another approach to evaluating alternatives under conditions of high environmental uncertainty is to use the real options theory. Okay? So according to the real options approach, when the future is highly uncertain, it pays to have a broad range of options open. So this is in contrast to using the net present value to calculate the value of a project by predicting its payouts, adjusting them for risk, and subtracting the amount invested. So by boiling everything down to one scenario, NPV doesn't provide any flexibility in case circumstances change. NPV is also difficult to apply to projects in which the potential payoffs are currently unknown. However, the real options approach deals with these issues by breaking the investment into stages. Management allocates a small amount of funding to initiate multiple projects, monitor the development, and then cancels the projects that aren't successful and funds those that are doing well. Now, this approach is very similar to the way venture capitalists fund an entrepreneurial venture in stages of funding based on the venture's performance. So, research indicates that the use of the real options approach does improve organizational performance. Now, the attractiveness of the strategic alternative is affected by its perceived compatibility with the key stakeholders in a corporation's task environment. Siyempre, creditors want to be paid on time. Okay, unions exert pressure for comparable wage and employment security as if they own the company. And governments and interest groups demand social responsibility. Shareholders want dividends. So all these pressures must be given some consideration in the selection of the best alternative. So in this case, we can classify or categorize stakeholders as either based on their interest in the corporation's activities and relative power to influence the corporation's activities. Okay? So strategic managers should ask 4 questions to assess the importance of stakeholder concerns in a particular decision. Number 1, how will this decision affect each stakeholder, especially those given high and medium priority? Number 2, how much of what each stakeholder wants is he or she likely to get under this alternative? Number 3, what are the stakeholders likely to do if they don't get what they want? Number 4, what is the probability that they will do it? So strategic makers or strategy managers should choose strategic alternatives that minimize external pressures and maximize the probability of gaining stakeholder support. Managers may, however, ignore or take some stakeholders for granted, leading to serious problems later. Okay? For example, Tata Group, I don't know if you have heard of that company. No, it is actually an Indian company that sells cars. Okay? It failed to consider the unwillingness of farmers in India to accept the West Bengal government's compensation for expropriating their land so that Tata could build its nano auto plant. In this case, no, you know what happened? Farmers formed rallies against the plant, blocked roads, and even assaulted an employee of a Tata supplier. Okay, so management can also propose a political strategy to influence its key stakeholders. This strategy is a plan to bring stakeholders into agreement with the corporation's actions. Now, if a strategy is incompatible with a company's culture or corporation's culture, the likelihood of its success is very low. Okay, foot dragging and even sabotage will result as employees fight to resist a radical change in corporate philosophy. Precedents from the past tend to restrict the kinds of objectives and strategies that are seriously considered. The aura of the founders of a corporation can linger long past their lifetimes because their values are imprinted on a corporation's members. So, in evaluating a strategic alternative, strategy makers must consider pressures from the corporate culture and assess a strategy's compatibility with that culture. So, if there's a little fit, management must decide if it should take a chance on ignoring the culture, manage around the culture and change the implementation plan, try to change the culture to fit the strategy, or to change the strategy to fit the culture. Further, a decision to proceed with a particular strategy without the commitment to change the culture or manage around the culture is dangerous. Nevertheless, restricting a corporation to only those strategies that are completely compatible with its culture might eliminate from consideration the most profitable alternatives. So even the most attractive alternatives might not be selected if it is contrary to the needs and the desires of important top managers. Industry and cultural backgrounds also affect strategic choice, no? And also there's a tendency to maintain the status quo, which means that decision makers continue with existing goals and plans beyond the point when an objective observer would recommend a change in course. So in this case, strategic course is the evaluation of alternative strategies and the selection of the best alternative. According to Paul Knott, an authority decision making, half of the decisions made by managers are failures. After analyzing 400 decisions, Knott found that failure almost always stems from the actions of the decision maker, not from bad luck or situational limitations. In these instances, managers commit one or more key blunders. Their desire for speedy actions leads to a rush to judgment. They apply failure prone decision making practices, such as adapting the claim of an influential stakeholder, and they make poor use of resources by investigating only one or two options. Now, there's a mounting evidence that when an organization is facing a dynamic environment, The best strategic decisions are not arrived at through consensus when everyone agrees on one alternative. They actually involve a certain amount of heated disagreement and even conflict. Many diverse opinions are presented, participants trust in one another's abilities and competencies, and conflict is task oriented, not personal. So, this is certainly the case for firms operating in global industries. Because unmanaged conflict often carries a high emotional cost. Authorities in decision making propose that strategic managers use program conflict. Two techniques help strategic managers avoid the consensus trap. Number one, we have the devil's advocate. The idea of the devil's advocate originated in the medieval Roman Catholic Church as a way of ensuring that impostors were not canonized as saints. One trusted person was elected to find and present all the reasons why a person should not be canonized. So, when this process is applied to strategic decision making, a devil's advocate, who may be an individual or a group, is assigned to identify potential pitfalls and problems with a proposed alternative strategy in a formal presentation. Dialectical inquiry. The dialectical philosophy, which can be traced back to Plato and Aristotle, and more recently to Hegel, involves combining two conflicting views, the thesis and the antithesis, into a synthesis. When applied to strategic decision making, dialectical inquiry requires the two proposals, using different assumptions, be generated for each alternative strategy under consideration. After advocates of each position present and debate the merits of their arguments before key decision makers, either one of the alternatives or a new compromise alternative is selected as the strategy to be implemented. Now, regardless of the process used to generate strategic alternatives, each resulting alternative must be rigorously evaluated in terms of its ability to meet the four criteria. Number one, mutual exclusivity. Doing any one alternative would preclude doing any other. Success, it must be feasible and have a good probability of success. Completeness, it must take into account all the key strategic issues. Internal consistency, it must make sense on its own as a strategic decision for the entire firm and not contradict key goals, policies, and strategies currently being pursued by the firm or its units. Okay, so what we have discussed are completes the strategy formulation and sets the stage for strategy implementation. So functional strategies must be formulated to support business and corporate strategies. However, the company will move in multiple directions and eventually pull itself apart. For a functional strategy to have the best chance of success, it should be built on a distinctive competency residing within the functional area. So if a corporation does not have a distinctive competency in a particular functional area, that functional area could be a candidate for outsourcing. Okay, so this ends our discussion for this session. Okay, so thank you everyone.